All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're going to read through chapter 4 of The Great Gatsby. And if you are new to this, we're not just going to read through each word. We're going to stop and talk about vocabulary. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted because I'm changing the zoom on my camera a little bit. Let me just do this. Okay, so if you're new to this, we're not just reading through the chapter. We are stopping and we are talking about interesting vocabulary, words that might be useful to you in your daily life. So, or interesting phrases that maybe you're not familiar with. And if you're watching this live with me, then I encourage you to ask questions in the chat about things about words that you're not sure of, or phrases that seem a little bit strange to you. And let's see, I didn't start my music. I want to start my mood music, but I can't remember the name of the... Oh yeah. Well, it says it's playing. Oh, here we go. That's strange. Well, I hope you can hear me. All right. Well, hopefully everything is okay. If you're watching this and you can't hear me or something is strange, let me know in the chat. It seems like something strange is going on this morning. Okay, anyway, let's get started with chapter 4, which I think is cursed. All right, on Sunday morning, while church bells rang in the village along the shore, the world and its mistress returned to Gatsby's house and twinkled hilariously on the lawn. "He's a bootlegger," said the young ladies. Bootlegging, by the way, that's making homemade alcohol, which is usually illegal. So a bootlegger is somebody who makes alcohol like in their backyard, in their garden or something. "He's a bootlegger," said the young ladies, moving somewhere between his cocktails and his flowers. "One time he killed a man who had found out that he was nephew to von Hindenburg and second cousin to the devil. Reach me a rose, honey, and pour me the last drop into that there crystal glass. Once I wrote down on the empty spaces of a timetable the names of those who came to Gatsby's house that summer. It's an old timetable now, disintegrating at its folds and headed, this schedule in effect July 5th, 1922. But I can still read the gray names, and they will give you a better impression than my generalities of those who accepted Gatsby's hospitality and paid him the subtle tribute of knowing nothing whatever about him. From East Egg, then, came the Chester Beckers and the Leaches, and a man named Bunsen, whom I knew at Yale, and Dr. Webster Civet, who was drowned last summer up in Maine, and the Hornbeams and the Willie Voltaires, and a whole clan named Black Buck, who always gathered in a corner and flipped up their noses like goats at whosoever came near. When someone has their nose in the air like this, if your nose is in the air, that means you're very proud and you feel like you're too good for everyone. So when he says they flipped up their noses at whoever came near them, that means they thought that they were superior people and didn't want to associate with anyone. And the Ismays and the Christies, or rather Hubert Auerbach and Mr. Christie's wife, and Edgar Beaver, whose hair, they say, turned cotton white one winter afternoon for no good reason at all. Clarence Endive was from East Egg, and I remember he came only once in white knickerbockers. Knickerbockers are pants that only go down to the knees. I think. I better check that. I'm pretty sure that's what knickerbockers are, though. Let's see. Knickerbocker. Yeah. We'll just look at a picture of that. So these are knickerbockers. Usually you should, these are like, I guess, hipster knickerbockers. You should be wearing socks, long socks with that, like this guy here. But these guys, I don't know, for some reason they're not wearing socks and it looks kind of ridiculous. Clarence Endive was from East Egg, and as I remember, he came only once in white knickerbockers and had a fight with a bum named Eddie in the garden. From farther out on the island came the Cheadles, and the O.R.P. Schraders, and the Stonewall Jackson Abrams of Georgia, and the Fishguards and the Ripley Snells. Snell was there 3 days before he went to the penitentiary. Penitentiary, that's like a prison. So drunk out of the gravel drive that Mrs. Ulysses Sweat's automobile ran over his right hand. The Danceys came too, and S.B. Whitebait, who was well over 60, and Maurice A. Flink, and the Hammerheads and Beluga, the tobacco importer, and Beluga's girls. From West Egg came the Poles, the Mulreadys, the Cecil Roebuck, and Cecil Schoen, and Gulick, and the state senator, and Newton Orchid, who controlled films par excellence, and Eckhouse, and Clyde Cohen, and Don S. Schwartz, the son. I don't know if these are supposed to be maybe 100 years ago. These were famous names. I don't recognize many of these names. And Arthur McCarty, all connected with the movies in one way or another, and the Catlips and the Bembergs and Earl Muldoon, brother to that Muldoon who afterwards strangled his wife. Da Fontano, the promoter, came there, and Ed Legros and James B. Rotgut Ferret. Rotgut is like cheap alcohol. So maybe this guy was famous for drinking very cheap alcohol. Ferret and DeJongs and Ernest Lilly, they came to gamble. And when Ferret wandered into the garden, it meant that he was cleaned out. To be cleaned out means you've lost all of your money. You don't have any money. Can I borrow $5, please? No. I'm sorry, I'm cleaned out. That means I don't have any money. And Associated Traction would have to fluctuate profitably the next day. A man named Klipspringer, who was there so often and so long that he became known as the boarder. A boarder is like a guest who pays rent. So if you're a boarder at a house, that means you live in a room and you pay rent to someone in the house. I doubt if he had any other home. Of theatrical people, there was Gus Wise and Horace O'Donovan and Lester Meyer and George Duckweed and Francis Bull. Also from New York were the Cromes and the Backheisens and Denekers and Russell Betty and the Corrigans and the Kelleher's and the Dewars and the Scullys and S.W. Belcher and the Smirks and the young Quinns divorced now, and Henry L. Palmetto, who killed himself by jumping in front of a subway train in Times Square. Benny McClenahan, arrived always with 4 girls. They were never quite the same ones in physical person, but they were so identical one with another that it inevitably seemed that they had been there before. I have forgotten their names, Jacqueline, I think, or else Consuela or Gloria, or Judy or June, and their last names were either melodious names of flowers and months, or sterner ones of the great American capitalists whose cousins, if pressed, they would confess themselves to be. In addition to all these, I can remember that Faustina O'Brien came there at least once, and the Baedeker girls, and the young brewer who had his nose shot off in the war, and Mr. Albrucksberger, and Miss Hagg, his fiancée, and Ardita Fitzpeters, and Mr. P. Jewett, once head of the American Legion, and Miss Claudia Hipp, with a man reputed to be her chauffeur, and a prince of something whom we called Duke, and whose name, if I ever knew it, I had forgotten. All these people came to Gatsby's house in the summer at 9 o'clock. One morning, late in July, Gatsby's gorgeous car lurched up the rocky drive to my door and gave out a burst of melody. From its 3-noted horn, it was the first time that he had called on me, though I had gone to 2 of his parties mounted in his hydroplane, and, at his urgent invitation, made frequent use of his beach. "Good morning, old sport. You're having lunch with me today, and I thought we'd ride up together." He was balancing himself on the dashboard of his car, with what resourcefulness of movement that is so peculiarly American, that comes, I suppose, with the absence of lifting work or rigid sitting in youth, and even more with the formless grace of our nervous, sporadic games. This quality was continually breaking through. His punctilious? What is that word? Punctilious. I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly. Punctilious. Punctilious. Showing great attention to detail or correct behavior. Punctilious. Through his punctilious manner in the shape of restlessness. He was never quite still. There was always a tapping foot somewhere, or the impatient opening and closing of a hand. He saw me looking with admiration at his car. "It's pretty, isn't it, old sport?" He jumped off to give me a better view. "Haven't you ever seen it before?" I'd seen it. Everybody had seen it. It was a rich cream color, bright with nickel, swollen here and there, in its monstrous length, with triumphant hat boxes and supper boxes and tool boxes, and terraced with a labyrinth of windshields that mirrored a dozen suns. Sitting down behind many layers of glass in a sort of green leather conservatory, we started to town. I had talked with him perhaps half a dozen times in the past month, and found, to my disappointment, that he had little to say. So my first impression, that he was a person of some undefined consequence, had gradually faded, and he became simply a proprietor of an elaborate roadhouse next door. So, Gatsby's a very mysterious person. He has these big parties, and he doesn't really participate in them. He sort of stands off to the side and watches them. He doesn't drink, and he just watches all the people behaving. And so Nick thought, oh, maybe this guy's kind of interesting. But after spending a lot of time with him, he's thinking, well, he doesn't really have anything to say. He doesn't really have a personality. So he's a little disappointed in that. And then came that disconcerting ride. We hadn't reached West Egg Village before Gatsby began leaving his elegant sentences unfinished and slapping himself indecisively on the knee of his caramel-colored suit. "Look here, old sport," he broke out surprisingly. "What's your opinion of me anyhow?" A little overwhelmed, I began the generalized evasions which that question deserves. To evade something is like, I wonder what the difference is between evade and avoid. Let's see. I'm going to ask ChatGPT because I'm not sure. To me, they're pretty similar. But there must be a difference. Let's see. Evade, according to ChatGPT, evade has the idea of maybe deceiving a little bit or difficulty. So if you're evading something, it usually involves escaping or getting away from it. And avoid is more neutral or straightforward. I guess I could agree with that. So imagine that somebody asks you, "Well, what do you think of me?" And you can't really tell the truth. Not always, anyway. Sometimes I guess you could tell the truth. But you have to be evasive. You have to be a little bit deceptive. And maybe avoid saying what you really think. "Well, I'm going to tell you something about my life," he interrupted. "I don't want you to get a wrong idea of me from all these stories you hear." So he was aware of the bizarre accusations that flavored conversation in his halls. "I'll tell you the God's truth." His right hand suddenly ordered divine retribution to stand by. "I'm the son of some wealthy people in the Middle West, all dead now. I was brought up in America, but educated at Oxford because all my ancestors have been educated there for many years. It is a family tradition." He looked at me sideways and knew why Jordan Baker had believed he was lying. He hurried the phrase "educated at Oxford," or swallowed it, or choked on it, as though it had bothered him before. And with this doubt, his whole statement fell to pieces, and I wondered if there wasn't something a little sinister about him after all. So, sinister means evil. And Nick, I guess, thinks maybe he is lying. "What part of the Middle West?" I inquired casually. "San Francisco." "I see." That's strange. I would never consider San Francisco to be the Middle West. To me, the Middle West is like Chicago. And San Francisco, to me, is the West Coast. Huh. "My family all died, and I came into a good deal of money." His voice was solemn. That means serious. As if the memory of what sudden extinction of a clan still haunted him. For a moment, I suspected that he was pulling my leg. To pull someone's leg means to lie to them, to tell them a story that isn't true. So he's saying, I suspected that he was lying to me. But a glance at him convinced me otherwise. After that, I lived like a young Raja in the capitals of Europe, Paris, Venice, Rome, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game, painting a little, things for myself only, and trying to forget something very sad that happened to me long ago. With an effort, I managed to restrain my incredulous laughter. The very phrases were worn, so threadbare that they evoked no image except that of a turbaned character leaking sawdust at every pore as he pursued a tiger through the Bois de Boulogne. I think that I don't know why Nick is saying this. Maybe either he doesn't believe him, or it's so cartoonish, so cliche that it sounds ridiculous. Then came the war, old sport. It was a great relief, and I tried very hard to die, but I seemed to bear an enchanted life. I accepted a commission as the first lieutenant, and when it began... let me read that again. I accepted a commission as a first lieutenant when it began. In the Argonne forest, I took 2 machine gun detachments so far forward that there was a half-mile gap on either side of us where the infantry couldn't advance. We stayed there 2 days and 2 nights, and 130 men with 16 Lewis guns. And when the infantry came up at last, they found the insignia of 3 German divisions among the piles of the dead. I was promoted to be a major, and every Allied government gave me a decoration, even Montenegro, little Montenegro down on the Adriatic Sea. Little Montenegro. He lifted up the words and nodded at them with a smile. This smile comprehended Montenegro's troubled history and sympathized with the brave struggles of the Montenegrin people. It appreciated fully the chain of national circumstances which had elicited this tribute from Montenegro's warm little heart. My incredulity was submerged in fascination now. It was like skimming hastily through a dozen magazines. He reached in his pocket, and a piece of metal slung on a ribbon fell into my palm. That's the one from Montenegro. To my astonishment, the thing had an authentic look. Orderi di Danilo, ran the circular legend. Montenegro, Nicholas Rex. Turn it. Major J. Gatsby, I read, for valor extraordinary. Here's another thing I always carry, a souvenir of the Oxford days. It was taken in Trinity Quad. The man on my left is now the Earl of Dorchester. It was a photograph of half a dozen men in blazers. Blazers are jackets. Loafing in an archway through which were visible a host of spires. There was Gatsby, looking a little, not much, younger, with a cricket bat in his hand. Then it was all true. I saw the skins of tigers flaming in his palace on the Grand Canal. I saw him opening a chest of rubies to ease with their crimson-lighted depths and gnawing his broken heart. Gnawing is, you picture like an animal eating something from a bone. That's gnawing. I'm going to make a big request of you today, he said, pocketing his souvenirs with satisfaction. So I thought you ought to know something about me. I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody, you see. I usually find myself among strangers because I drift here and there trying to forget the sad thing that happened to me. He hesitated. You'll hear about it this afternoon. At lunch? No, this afternoon. I happened to find out that you're taking Miss Baker to tea. Do you mean you're in love with Miss Baker? No, old sport, I'm not, but Miss Baker has kindly consented to speak to you about this matter. I hadn't the faintest idea what this matter was, but I was more annoyed than interested. I hadn't asked Jordan to tea in order to discuss Mr. J. Gatsby. I was sure the request would be something utterly fantastic. And for a moment, I was sorry I'd ever set foot upon his overpopulated lawn. He wouldn't say another word. His correctness grew on him, and as we neared the city, we passed Port Roosevelt, where there was a glimpse of a red-belted ocean-going ships, and sped along a cobbled slum lined with dark, undeserted saloons of the faded gilt 1900s. Then the valley of ashes opened out on both sides of us, and I had a glimpse of Mrs. Wilson straining at the garage pump with panting vitality as we went by. With fenders spread like wings, we scattered light through half Astoria. Only half, for as we twisted among the pillars of the elevated, I heard the familiar jug spat of a motorcycle, and a frantic policeman rode alongside. "All right, old sport," called Gatsby. We slowed down, taking a white card from his wallet as he waved it before the man's eyes. "Right you are," agreed the policeman, tipping his cap. "Know you next time, Mr. Gatsby. Excuse me." "What was that?" I inquired. "The picture of Oxford. I was able to do the commissioner a favor once, and he sends me a Christmas card every year." I don't really understand what's going on here. They're driving to town, and then a policeman drives on a motorcycle next to them, and some kind of Mr. Gatsby or the policeman hands one another a card? I don't know, that's very strange. Okay. Over the great bridge, with the sunlight through the girders making a constant flicker upon the moving cars, with the city rising up across the river, in white heaps and sugar lumps, all built with a wish out of a non-olfactory money. The city seen from the Queensboro Bridge is always the city seen for the first time, in its first wild promise of all the mystery and beauty in the world. A dead man passed us in a hearse heaped with blooms, followed by 2 carriages with drawn blinds, and by more cheerful carriages for friends. The friends looked out at us with the tragic eyes and short upper lips of southeastern Europe, and I was glad that the sight of Gatsby's splendid car was included in their somber holiday. As we crossed Blackwell's Island, a limousine passed us, driven by a white chauffeur, in which sat 3 modish Negroes. Modish? Let's see, what does modish mean? Yeah, I thought that maybe because mode is a word for fashion. And so modish, I don't think that people use that word now. I've never heard anybody say that, but it means fashionable. $2 and a girl. I laughed aloud as the yolks of their eyeballs rolled toward us in haughty rivalry. Anything can happen now that we've slid over this bridge, I thought. Anything at all. Even Gatsby could happen without any particular wonder. Roaring noon in well-fanned 42nd Street cellar, I met Gatsby for lunch. Blinking away the brightness of the street outside, my eyes picked out obscurely in the afternoon talking to another man. "Mr. Carraway, this is my friend Mr. Wolsheim." A small, flat-nosed Jew raised his large head and regarded me with 2 fine growths of hair which luxuriated in either nostril. After a moment, I discovered his tiny eyes in the half-darkness. "So I took one look at him," said Mr. Wolsheim, shaking my hand earnestly. "And what do you think I did?" "What?" I inquired politely. But evidently he was not addressing me, for he dropped my hand and covered Gatsby with his expressive nose. I handed the money to Cat's Paw, and I said, "All right, Cat's Paw, don't pay him a penny till he shuts his mouth." He shut it, and there. Gatsby took an arm of each of us and moved forward into the restaurant, whereupon Mr. Wolsheim swallowed a new sentence he was starting and lapsed into a somnambulatory abstraction. "Highballs?" asked the waiter. Highball glass, I think, is like a tall glass. So I think he's saying, do you want a cocktail? "This is a nice restaurant here," said Mr. Wolsheim, looking at the Presbyterian nymphs on the ceiling. "But I like across the street better." "Yes, highballs," agreed Gatsby. And then to Mr. Wolsheim, "It's too hot over there." "Hot and small, yes," said Mr. Wolsheim, "but full of memories." "What place is that?" I asked. "The old Metropole." "The old Metropole," brooded Mr. Wolsheim gloomily, "filled with faces dead and gone, filled with friends gone now forever. I can't forget so long as I live the night that they shot Rosie Rosenthal there. It was 6 of us at the table, and Rosie had eaten and drunk a lot all evening. And when it was almost morning, the waiter came up to him with a funny look and says, 'Somebody wants to speak to him outside.' 'All right,' says Rosie, and begins to get up, and I pulled him down in his chair. 'Let the bastards come in here if they want you, Rosie, but don't you, so help me, move outside this room.' It was 4 o'clock in the morning then, and if we'd raised our blinds, we'd have seen daylight." "Did he go?" I asked innocently. "Sure he went." Mr. Wolsheim's nose flashed at me indignantly. He turned around in the door and says, "Don't let the waiter take away my coffee." And then he went out on the sidewalk and they shot him 3 times in the belly, full in his full belly, and drove away. 4 of them were electrocuted, I said, remembering. 5 with Becker. His nostrils turned to me in an interested way. "I understand you're looking for a business." What is this word? Oh, I think it's connection, but they're connection. So I think he's trying to do like a Jewish accent. "I understand you're looking for a business connection." Okay. The juxtaposition of these 2 remarks was startling. Gatsby answered for me. "Oh, no," he exclaimed. "This isn't the man." "No?" Mr. Wolsheim seemed disappointed. "This is just a friend. I told you we'd talk about that some other time." "I beg your pardon," said Mr. Wolsheim. "I had a wrong man." A succulent hash arrived, and Mr. Wolsheim, forgetting the more sentimental atmosphere of the old Metropole, began to eat with ferocious delicacy. His eyes, meanwhile, roved very slowly all around the room. He completed the art by turning to inspect the people directly behind. I think that, except for my presence, he would have taken one short glance beneath our own table. "Look here, old sport," said Gatsby, leaning toward me. "I'm afraid I made you a little angry this morning in the car." There was that smile again, but this time I held out against it. "Oh, I don't like mysteries," I answered, "and I don't understand why you won't come out frankly and tell me what you want. Why has it all got to come through Miss Baker?" "Oh, it's nothing underhand." Something underhanded means like something sneaky, something deceptive. something like that. So when he says it's nothing underhand, it means, oh, it's not, don't be suspicious, don't worry, I'm not trying to trick you. He assured me, Miss Baker's a great sportswoman, you know, and she'd never do anything that wasn't all right. Suddenly he looked at his watch, jumped up and hurried from the room, leaving me and Mr. Wolsheim at the table. He has to telephone, said Mr. Wolsheim, following him with his eyes. Oh, N is here. Good morning, N. How are you doing today? Held out. You're asking about held out. I don't even remember reading that. Where was? Oh, held out against it. Oh, okay. Earlier in the story, when Nick first meets Mr. Gatsby, the thing that he notices about him is he has this incredible smile. And he says, you only meet 2 or 3 people in your whole lifetime with this kind of smile. It's a very special smile. When he smiles at you, you forget everything. He's got a very, very special smile. And he can manipulate people with this smile. So that was the first thing that he noticed about Gatsby when he met him. And during the morning, when they were driving to town, Nick got angry with Gatsby got annoyed. He got annoyed with Gatsby because Gatsby is saying, well, you're having lunch with Miss Baker, or you're having tea with Miss Baker later today, and she's going to tell you some interesting things about me. And Nick's like, well, why are you planning my conversation with her? And if you want to tell me something, why don't you just tell me? So he's kind of annoyed by that, and he doesn't like it. And now Gatsby's acknowledging that. He's saying, I'm sorry about that. And Nick is saying, why are you doing this? And then he gives that smile again. Now the first time he wasn't expecting the smile, but this time he knows that he has this talent. And so when he smiles, Nick is ready for it. He's not going to let that smile manipulate him. To hold out means to defend, maybe like defend yourself against something. I'm trying to think of other times when you hold out. Imagine an army is attacking a city, and all the people, and it seems hopeless, like the army is going to attack the city and take over the city, but all of the people in the city fight. Even though it seems like they're going to lose, they don't care. They just fight and fight and fight, and you can say they're holding out. Like they're trying to survive against something impossible. That's really kind of what it means. It means like surviving against something impossible to survive against. So there was that smile again, but this time I held out against it. That means I defended myself against it, even though that's kind of impossible. Somehow I did it. He has to telephone, said Mr. Wolsheim, following him with his eyes. Fine fellow, isn't he? Handsome to look at, and a perfect gentleman. Yes. He's an Oxford man. Oh? He went to Oxford College in England, you know. Oxford College. I've heard of it. It's one of the most famous colleges in the world. Have you known Gatsby for a long time, I inquired. Several years, he answered, in a gratified way. I made the pleasure of his acquaintance just after the war, but I knew I had discovered a man of fine breeding after I talked with him for an hour. I said to myself, there's the kind of man you'd like to take home and introduce to your mother and your sister. He paused. I see you're looking at my cuff buttons. The cuff This is the cuff. This is the cuff of your shirt. So I see you're looking at my cuff buttons. I hadn't been looking at them, but I did now. They were composed of oddly familiar pieces of ivory. Finest specimen of human molders, he informed me. Well, I inspected. That's a very interesting idea. Yeah, he flipped his sleeves under his coat. Yeah, Gatsby's very careful about women. He would never so much as look at a friend's wife. When the subject of this instinctive trust returned to the table and sat down, Mr. Woolsheim drank his coffee with a jerk and got to his feet. A jerk is like a quick movement. So if he drank his coffee with a jerk, that's kind of like he just drank it very quickly. I have enjoyed my lunch, he said, and I'm going to run off from you two young men before I outstay my welcome. Don't hurry, Meyer, said Gatsby without enthusiasm. Mr. Woolsheim raised his hand in a sort of benediction. You're very polite, but I belong to another generation, he announced solemnly. You sit here and discuss your sports and your young ladies and your... He supplied an imaginary noun with another wave of his hand. As for me, I'm 50 years old. I won't impose myself on you any longer. And he shook hands and turned away. His tragic nose was trembling. As he shook hands and turned away, his tragic nose was trembling. N is asking about solemnly. Solemn is like very serious. Where was that? They use that word a lot in this story. I've seen it many times. You're very polite, but I belong to another generation, he said. He announced solemnly, so he was very serious sounding when he said that. As he shook hands and turned away, his tragic nose was trembling. I wondered if I had said anything to offend him. He becomes very sentimental sometimes, explained Gatsby. It's one of his sentimental days. He's quite a character around New York, a denizen of Broadway. Who is he, anyhow? An actor? No. A dentist? Meyer Woolsheim? No, he's a gambler. Gatsby hesitated, and then added coolly, he's the man who fixed the World Series back in 1919. Fixed the World Series, I repeated. The idea staggered me. I remember, of course, that the World Series had been fixed in 1919, but if I had thought of it at all, I would have thought of it as a thing that merely happened, the end of some inevitable chain. It never occurred to me that one man could start to play with the faith of 50 million people in a single-mindedness of a burglar blowing a safe. How did he happen to do that? I asked after a minute. He just saw the opportunity. Why isn't he in jail? They can't get him, old sport. He's a smart man. I insisted on paying the check. As the waiter brought my change, I caught sight of Tom Buchanan across the crowded room. Come along with me for a minute, I said. I've got to say hello to someone. When he saw us, Tom jumped up and took half a dozen steps in our direction. Where have you been? He demanded eagerly. Daisy's furious because you haven't called up. This is Mr. Gatsby, Mr. Buchanan. They shook hands briefly, and strained, unfamiliar look of embarrassment came over Gatsby's face. How have you been, anyhow? Demanded Tom of me. How'd you happen to come up this far to eat? I've been having lunch with Mr. Gatsby. I turned toward Mr. Gatsby, but he was no longer there. One October day in 1917, said Jordan Baker, that afternoon, sitting up very straight on a straight chair in the tea garden at the Plaza Hotel, I was walking along, from one place to another, half on the sidewalks and half on the lawns. I was happier on the lawns because I had on shoes from England with rubber knobs on the soles that bit into the soft ground. I had on a new plaid skirt also that blew a little in the wind, and whenever this happened, the red, white, and blue banners in front of all the houses stretched out stiff and said tut 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 in a disapproving way. The largest of the banners and the largest of the lawns belonged to Daisy Faye's house. She was just 18. 2 years older than me, and by far the most popular of all the young girls in Louisville. She dressed in white and had a little white roadster, and all day long the telephone rang in her house, and excited young officers from Camp Taylor demanded the privilege of monopolizing her that night. Anyways, for an hour. Kai Pan is asking, knobs? What are knobs? Well, honestly, I'm not sure what that means in relation to shoes, but let's see. Let's look at shoe knobs. It must just be part of a shoe. But there's a brand of shoe called Knobs, but I don't really see. Let's see. What if we just try the word knob? I mean, there's doorknob, but that's with a K. K-N-O-B. More definitions. Yeah, I don't really know. I don't know what a knob is. I don't find a really good answer either. I guess maybe it just means like the front part of the shoe, because she's wearing shoes and she likes to walk in the grass because I think the bottom is covered with rubber. And so I was just picturing that maybe knob is like the toe part of the shoe. But, I'm Googling it here and I don't even... the meaning of knob is head. That's what Google says. So probably that's what I was kind of picturing, like the front part of the shoe. But I don't think that it's a word that people use because, if you look for pictures of knobs on shoes, there's a brand name called Knobs, but they don't really show any pictures of shoes or parts of shoes. So I'm not really sure. N is asking about plaid. Plaid is... Let me show you a picture of plaid. Plaid is a design. These are all plaid. This is what plaid is. When I came opposite her house that morning, her white roadster was beside the curb, and she was sitting in it with a lieutenant I had never seen before. They were so engrossed in each other. To be engrossed in something means to be very focused on it. So these two young people, a man and a woman, and they were very engrossed with each other, meaning focusing on each other. That she didn't see me until I was 5 feet away. "Hello, Jordan," she called unexpectedly. "Please come here." I was flattered that she wanted to speak to me. Because of all the older girls... Kai Pan is saying it's a variant of knob. It's funny because when I look up the word knob, it says, let's see. Here, let me show you this. I guess it's a confusing word. See, this actually says knob is sometimes confused with K-N-O-B. So here, at least on Google, if Google's an authority, I wouldn't trust Google anymore with anything. but according to Google, it says that they're not the same. But the word knob is sometimes confused with knob, K-N-O-B. I was flattered that she wanted to speak to me because of all the older girls I admired her most. She asked me if I was going to the Red Cross and make bandages. I was. Well, then I would tell them that she couldn't come that day. The officer looked at Daisy while she was speaking in a way... Wait a minute, let me read that again. She asked me if I was going to the Red Cross to make bandages. I was. Well, then I would tell them that she couldn't come that day. Well, because she's spending time with her new boyfriend. Oh, that was a question. Would I tell them that she couldn't come that day? So she was asking. Okay. The officer looked at Daisy while she was speaking in a way that every young girl wants to be looked at sometime. And because it seemed romantic to me, I've remembered that incident ever since. His name was J. Gatsby, and I didn't lay eyes on him for over 4 years. Oh, so J. Gatsby was in love with Daisy, Nick's cousin, who's married to Tom Buchanan now. Even after I'd met him on Long Island, I didn't realize it was the same man. That was 1917. By the next year, I had a few beaux myself. Beau is the French word for beautiful in the masculine form, and it's not really common to use that now, but in the past that used to mean boyfriend. So if you had a beau, that meant you had a boyfriend. So she said, I had a few beaux myself, which means I had a few boyfriends myself. And I began to play in tournaments. So I didn't see Daisy very often. She went with a slightly older crowd, when she went with anyone at all. Wild rumors were circulating about her, how her mother had found her packing her bag one winter night to go to New York and say goodbye to a soldier who was going overseas. She was effectually prevented, but she wasn't on speaking terms with her family for several weeks. After that, she didn't play around with the soldiers anymore, but only with a few flat-footed, short-sighted young men in town who couldn't get into the army at all. By the next autumn, she was gay again. Gay just means happy, by the way. Gay as ever. She had a debut after the armistice, and in February, she was presumably engaged to a man from New Orleans. In June, she married Tom Buchanan of Chicago, with more pomp and circumstance than Louisville ever knew before. He came down with 100 people in 4 private cars and hired a whole floor of Sealbox Hotel. And the day before the wedding, he gave her a string of pearls valued at $350,000. Wow. So that would be like $5 million in today's money. I was bridesmaid. I came into her room half an hour before the bridal dinner. And is asking about the word presumably. To presume something, it kind of means like I imagine. Right, let's see. Where did they use it? I don't see it. Presumably. I can't find it. Well, let's look up the official definition. But, I mean, the way that I think you should use it is like, I imagine, or I guess, or something like that. It's kind of a fancy way of saying I guess. Let's see, presumably engaged. Used to convey what is asserted as very likely, though not for certain. Yeah. Presumably engaged, you say? Let's see. Oh, I see it now. So, by the next autumn, she was gay. Gay again. Gay as ever. She had a debut after the armistice, and in February she was presumably engaged to a man from New Orleans. So, maybe what that means is, because presumably is like, I guess she was married to somebody from New Orleans, but she didn't marry him, she married somebody else. So maybe at the time there were rumors that she was engaged to someone, but she never told anyone. It was never confirmed. I was bridesmaid. I came into her room half an hour before the bridal dinner and found her lying on the bed, as lovely as a June night in her flowered dress and as drunk as a monkey. She had a bottle of Sauterne in one hand and a letter in the other. "Gratulate me," she muttered. "Never had a drink before, but oh, how do I enjoy it." "What's the matter, Daisy?" I was scared, I can tell you. I'd never seen a girl like that before. "Here, dearest," she groped around in a wastebasket she had with her on the bed and pulled out the string of pearls. "Take 'em downstairs and give 'em back to whoever they belong to. Tell 'em all Daisy changed her mind. Say Daisy's changed her mind." She began to cry. She cried and cried, and I rushed out and found her mother's maid, and we locked the door and got her into a cold bath. She wouldn't let go of the letter. Groping is like grabbing for something. Where was that? Like rope? She groped around in the wastebasket. So she's got the wastebasket and she's going like this, groping around, grabbing with her hands in the wastebasket, looking for something, the pearl necklace. She began to cry. Oh wait. I rushed out and found her mother's maid, and we locked the door and got her into a cold bath. She wouldn't let go of the letter. She took it into the tub with her and squeezed it up into a wet ball, and only let me leave it in the soap dish when she saw that it was coming to pieces like snow. She didn't say another word. We gave her spirits of ammonia and put ice on her forehead and hooked her back into her dress. And half an hour later, when we walked out of the room, the pearls were around her neck, and the incident was over. The next day at 5 o'clock, she married Tom Buchanan, and without so much as a shiver, we started off on a 3-month trip to the South Seas. I saw them in Santa Barbara when they came back. I thought I'd never seen a girl so mad about her husband. If he left the room for a minute, she'd look around uneasily and say, "Where's Tom gone?" and wear the most abstracted expression until she saw him coming in the door. She used to sit on the sand with his head in her lap by the hour, rubbing her finger over his eyes and looking at him with unfathomable delight. It was touching to see them together. It made you laugh in a hushed, fascinated way. That was in August. A week after I left Santa Barbara, Tom ran into a wagon on the Ventura Road one night and ripped a front wheel off his car. The girl who was with him got into the papers because her arm was broken. She was one of the chambermaids in the Santa Barbara Hotel. The next April, Daisy had her little girl, and they went to France for a year. I saw them one spring in Cannes, and later in Deauville. And they came back to Chicago to settle down. Daisy was popular in Chicago, as you know. They moved with a fast crowd, all of them young and rich, wild, but she came out with an absolutely perfect reputation, perhaps because she doesn't drink. It's a great advantage not to drink among the hard drinking people. You can hold your tongue, and moreover, you can time any little irregularity of your own, so that everybody else is so blind they don't see or care. Perhaps Daisy never went in for armor at all, and yet there's something in that voice of hers. Well, about 6 weeks ago, she heard the name Gatsby for the first time in years. It was when I asked you, do you remember if you knew Gatsby in West Egg? After you had gone home, she came into my room and woke me up and said, "What Gatsby?" And when I described him, I was half asleep, and she said in the strangest voice that it must be the man she used to know. It wasn't until then that I connected this Gatsby with the officer in her white car. When Jordan Baker had finished telling me all this, we had left the plaza for half an hour and were driving in a Victoria through Central Park. The sun had gone down behind the tall apartments of the movie stars in the West 50s, and the clear voices of girls, already gathered like crickets on the grass, rose through the hot twilight. I'm the Sheik of Araby, your love belongs to me. At night when you're asleep, into your tent I'll creep. It was a strange coincidence, I said, but it wasn't a coincidence at all. Why not? Gatsby bought that house so that Daisy would be just across the bay. Then it had not been merely the stars to which he had aspired on that June night he came alive to me, delivered suddenly from the womb of his purposeless splendor. He wants to know, continued Jordan, if you'll invite Daisy to your house some afternoon and then let him come over. The modesty of the demand shook me. He had waited 5 years and bought a mansion where he dispensed starlight to casual moths so that he could come over some afternoon to a stranger's garden. Did I have to know all this before he could ask such a little thing? He's afraid. He's waited so long he thought you might be offended. You see, he's a regular tough underneath it all. Something worried me. Why didn't he ask you to arrange a meeting? Why didn't he ask you to arrange a meeting? He wants her to see his house, she explained, and your house is right next door. Oh. I think he half expected her to wander into one of his parties some night, went on Jordan. Anne is asking about the word dispense. I don't remember reading that word. I'm not going to look for it, but that's a very useful word. Dispensing means like giving something. Well, maybe I should look it up. I'm going to look for it in a minute, but that's a very useful word because it means giving out. And so, for example, let me show you how you can see that word in regular life. This is a napkin dispenser because it gives out napkins. You take napkins from it. Dispensing means giving something out. Or we could find This is a cup dispenser because it gives out cups. So that's actually a very common word. It's a very useful word. Let's see, where was it used? Thanks, Kai Pan, for putting the words there for me. That saves like 5 minutes of me looking for it. But it says he had waited 5 years and bought a mansion where he dispensed starlight to casual moths. So what he's talking about are these grand parties that he gives. That's the starlight. And the casual moths are all the strangers that he invites to his home. So he gives out starlight to all of these moths looking for a party in the middle of the night. I think he half expected her to wander into one of his parties some night, went on Jordan. But she never did. Then he began asking people casually if they knew her, and I was the first one he found. It was that night he sent for me at his dance, and you should have heard him. You should have heard the elaborate way he worked up to it. Of course, I immediately suggested a luncheon in New York, and I thought he'd go mad. I don't want to do anything out of the way, he kept saying. I want to see her right next door. When I said you were a particular friend of Tom's, he started to abandon the whole idea. He doesn't know very much about Tom, though. He says he's read a Chicago paper for years, just on the chance of catching a glimpse of Daisy's name. It was dark now, and we dipped under a little bridge. I put my arm around Jordan's golden shoulder, and she drew her toward me and asked her to dinner. What? That doesn't make any sense. Wait, I put my arm around Jordan's golden shoulder, and she drew her toward me. That doesn't make any sense. And asked her to dinner. Suddenly, I wasn't thinking of Daisy and Gatsby anymore, but of this clean, hard, limited person who dealt in universal skepticism and who leaned back jauntily just within a circle of my arm. I think maybe she drew herself. Remember, we've seen that word draw before. It doesn't mean like making a picture draw. It means like extract. So if she drew herself towards him, that would be like her leaning into him like this. A phrase began to beat in my ears with a sort of heady excitement. There are only the pursued, the pursuing, the busy, and the tired. And Daisy ought to have something in her life, murmured Jordan to me. Does she want to see Gatsby? She's not to know about it. Gatsby doesn't want her to know. You're just supposed to invite her to tea. We passed a barrier of dark trees, and then the facade of 59th Street. A block of delicate pale light beamed down into the park. Unlike Gatsby and Tom Buchanan, I had no girl whose disembodied face floated along the dark cornices and blinding signs, and so I drew up the girl beside me, tightening my arms. Her wan, scornful... I've seen that word before, wan. I have no idea what that means. W-A-N. If you describe someone as wan, you mean that they look pale and tired. He looked wan and tired. Okay, but I don't recommend using that word in regular life. I don't think anybody will know what you're talking about if you use that word. But I think that's already occurred in this book a couple of times, or maybe it was some other book I was reading. Her wan, scornful mouth smiled, so I drew her up again, closer this time to my face. Uh-oh, are they developing a thing? Okay, well that was Chapter 5 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, or Chapter 4. So next time we will be doing Chapter 5. So that should be about the same time on Sunday. Not tomorrow, because I'm going to be busy, but on Sunday morning. So same time on Sunday, we will read Chapter 5 of The Great Gatsby. Kai Pan has a wonderful memory. Juan's smile from Chapter 3. Wow, that's an amazing memory that you have. Okay, so thank you for staying and asking questions and making comments, and I hope that you come back on Sunday when we read through Chapter 5. Until then, goodbye.